Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Yeah, Donnie said he's not going to be able to join us tonight. Neither is Deborah. But, I guess Deborah did get her apartment, and she still has to move. So pray for that process still.
Ezra has a book to show you.
Ezra's got a book. Show us, Ezra.
Llama loves to read. Llama loves to read.
Nice.
Loves to read.
Okay, go play.
Very cool.
Okay, that's
Very nice.
So we're going to be in Matthew 6 tonight, 19 through 24, where Jesus talks about treasures in heaven and treasures on earth. So I have a little icebreaker question, and kind of pertains to this a little bit. So one thing, so not person, one thing that you can't live without, or if it was taken from you, you feel like, oh man, that would make life really hard. So not person, right? We don't want you to choose between loved ones, but a thing in your life that if it was taken away, you'd be most disappointed, or would make your life the most inconvenient. One thing.
I'd say work.
Work. All right. DJ?
I was going to go with oxygen.
All right.
Material
That
possession.
would make life hard.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Maybe I
Yeah,
should
patient,
maybe
tell
I
me
should
they're
clarify. Material thing.
Material possession?
Material.
Yeah, we'll clarify material possession, material thing.
Like,
I was gonna follow DJ with gravity, you know.
oh, that would be fun, though.
Yeah, well,
For about 20 seconds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joel,
I guess about
Well, it's driving, or having a vehicle.
yeah.
That's a tough one, you know, because now
we all
you're
probably
depending
went
on
to the
others.
same church, right?
Well, that's not necessarily so, but you're depending on someone else to get you there,
Yeah.
and that's a different experience. Like going back to childhood.
you guys have a second vehicle now, Joel?
We have a second vehicle right now. That doesn't really help me, but we do. So I
I was just thinking you guys have experience being without a vehicle for such a long time, then you know how much you need it.
Yeah, that is true. It is definitely tough with just one vehicle, and being without a vehicle. Yeah, you're right about experiencing that.
But when you asked the question, the first thing I thought of was the vehicle. But then I decided, well, no, it wasn't as bad as it seemed. I mean, it was an inconvenience. It was definitely an inconvenience, but it wasn't as bad as it seemed. What really came to me was, and I'm holding it right now, my Bible that I've had for years, where I put all this information in it, and I've marked all these different things. And I know my Bible study teacher lost her Bible, and she was just beside herself. And I kept thinking, oh God, I don't ever want to lose this Bible, please. Because it's got everything in it. I know exactly where to look for things, so that would be the thing. I would be really distressed if I lost this Bible.
That's a good one.
If so you just said like material possessions, but could I expand it to just like earthly possessions?
So would you not include a Bible then?
No, I still would include a Bible, but by saying earthly possessions, I think I can then say what I was actually thinking at first, like a more realistic thing that would be difficult to live without. And I would say like your mind. So if you just lost your ability to cognitively think, and that's not really a materialistic possession, but it is an earthly possession. But at the same time, it would be great because you wouldn't even know. It'd be you just be ignorant. So it's pros and cons.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah. They call that dementia.
Right.
Yes.
Well, someday, DJ. Someday you'll get there.
Hopefully not. Like
No, you'd like to avoid that. I can assure
Right.
you that.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Hopefully not.
Yeah. Dementia. And what's hey, Ange, what's the other one? Because
Alzheimer's.
okay,
And
Alzheimer's.
you're
Yeah,
thinking Alzheimer's, that is a form of dementia. So yeah, you're right.
Adeline, you got your hand up?
Yeah. Food.
Ooh,
Like
Oh
soup,
yes.
like
Food in
every
there?
type of food.
what food would be the worst to lose? Which one do you not want to give up the most? What's your favorite?
Careful, this guy does fasts.
What's your favorite food,
Oh.
Adeline?
He-
He's not answering.
Pancakes and peanut butter.
Pancakes and peanut butter. All right.
Good answer.
I also did find an Evelyn Rose.
Very good.
Cool.
I told you it was in there.
Excellent.
Oh, shoot.
Randy,
Evelyn,
yeah.
Well, I thought about this a little while, and I know from my friends that being in the military, when you're posted somewhere outside of the ZI, the zone of the interior, you start to realize what you're really missing. Mike sells potato chips, and Ohio tomatoes are particularly flavorful. There's no Esther Price candy to run and go get. And then it really starts to dawn on you. There's no county fairs there. You start to pick up on the things that you miss. But your question was, what would you like permanently do without? What would you really go, I'm not me anymore. I don't think there's anything on my list. If I was challenged to give it up, I think I could. I don't like the idea of being without the Bible, but or my church home or my pastor and all my brothers and sisters. But other than that, I think I can survive. Like the guy in the space capsule. Give him his Bible, he's good to go for a while.
We lost Carrie and the crew.
Oh,
So mine is very materialistic, but there's good reasoning behind it. So I would say my phone would be really hard because I call friends and family. I try usually when I'm like driving to or from a place, I'll try to call people that I haven't talked to, whatever, in a week or whatever or so. And I try to talk to my parents, whatever, a couple times a week. So that's just one of the things I really enjoy, doing. And then also I like to listen. I always like to listen to something. So whether it's music or a podcast or a book as well. So not that I couldn't live without it, but maybe something that I would least like to have taken away. What are you doing, Ethan? Yeah. What are you doing?
it's part of the sleepover. Let's sneak around and have fun.
All righty. Well, let's get into the word. So Matthew 6. Okay, go by mama. So Jesus in verse 19 starts addressing where kind of where focus is, and just the goals, goals that you have in life. And so he says in verse 19, don't store up for yourself treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that light? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So immediate questions or comments or things that stuck out to you in particular from that passage? Anybody?
Huh.
First thing that
Like
stands
that.
out to me is that mine doesn't say vermin, mine says rust. And usually things are kind of close together, but I was just like, wow, there's a big difference between vermin and rust. I mean, vermin, I think of, animals or something, like rats or stuff like that, but rust is completely different. So I just, that stood out to me.
Yeah, for sure. That stood out to me too, kind of as I was reading and preparing from my version. You always hear where moth and rust destroy. So yeah, did anybody
Wow.
look up what the difference comes from, or no?
Oh, no, wow. Okay. That's whoa. Huh.
You're not muted.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It sounded like you were getting ready to say something, so I was like, "Oh, okay, Joel's gonna talk. All right, here we go. Okay. Any other immediate, questions or things that stood out to you that you feel like might be important or interesting or impactful?
I don't know if it's going to be impactful, but I just remembered hearing this verse a lot of times, but I don't remember the kind of the middle section about the eye being the lamp and the light and darkness being a part of that.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, you kind of always hear that first part.
And then it goes, usually I always thought it kind of just went to, you can't serve two masters. I didn't realize there's that whole middle part.
Yeah, it sort of kind of translates that we want what we look at that we think we like, right? So if your eyes are illuminating things of beauty and you say, ooh, I want that, that leads the body to go after it, doesn't it? But if the eyes aren't healthy, they see things that aren't important, and we find ourselves going in wasteful directions and living in a darkness. We don't see the treasure in heaven the same way. It's very, yep, I get it.
Yeah, so, Angie, you talked about the vermin, and so that original kind of Greek word, and maybe why it was translated that way. And really, when you get to that, you can see how rust is an appropriate translation and how vermin is, because it's almost like something eating away at. So it's the eating away at of something. And really the one thing I was looking up is, almost everywhere the word is used to eat, like the eating process. So in Greek, so kind of interesting. Joel, what you got?
Well, oh, I am Okay, I'm off mute.
Yep,
Okay,
yep.
so wanted to really ask a question because the same thing. I know her name, and I don't want to say DJ's wife. I know that. I can't think of it. About the light part, and really asking a question more so about that. The way it's talking about how it's kind of referring itself when it talked about sound and about the eyes being no good. So it's, I guess that part is more so of what we're letting in. Am I saying that right? Rachel, what Rachel said. So not paying attention to that, but so that more so about what you're focusing on. So light being what, in this case, referencing of what we're taking in, meaning what we're focusing on, or what we're allowing ourselves to sort of be tempted towards. Am I interpreting that right? Is that what you were saying, Rachel? I mean, so really that caught my attention too, because in the version I'm looking at, it does sort of make that part sit out. So it's more of a question I'm posing for anyone to answer if I interpreted that right.
Yeah, I think there's
Randy shaking his head.
I think there's a lot.
Nodding, actually.
Yeah, maybe we'll get there, Joel. And I had some, interesting kind of thoughts about that too, and just kind of the way that Jesus phrases some stuff is there in there, and even things that I didn't even mention in my teaching on Sunday that I thought are worth kind of going into. But I think it does reference the Jesus is using the eyes as the lamp of the body to kind of expound on his thought, in the verses before, and then to set up, his thoughts in the verses following. So he uses, your eyes as almost this illustration to make his point and to support his point. So I think it's a very good teaching strategy for sure. What you got, Angie?
But without what you explained on Sunday, you have to admit it really does not. I mean, other than I guess we're looking at it the way that Randy and Joel were, it really doesn't make sense. I mean, I was going along with what Rachel was saying, that it just like pops out of nowhere, and you're like, what does that have to do with what they're talking about? And then it ends. And by the way, if you can't serve God and wealth, so you just couldn't understand it. But hearing the description of the types of eyes, that made it connected. That gave it a connection where you were like, oh, okay, it's another one of these things where we're kind of not in that time with that reference. And so therefore, for now, it just sounds out there.
Yeah. So Proverbs, even like Proverbs 22:9 says, whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread, with the poor. And so that's kind of that, goes in line with that same line of thinking of, the way that you view the world and how you look out into the world. And so we'll get there too, because I think what Jesus says, it's really confusing. Like, if the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? It's like, wait, hold on. Like run that back, Jesus. What are you saying here? If the light is dark, what? So it's, it is a kind of almost like a oxymoron, right? So but it's good. It's good, like imagery, and it makes you think for sure. Any other thoughts on the passage as a whole? Maybe before we go verse by verse.
For myself, that last part's always, I won't say scared me, but concerned. I mean, the last part in 24, when it talks about not serving both God and money. Just, I know about it, but for myself, that's always kind of worried me, and sort of my thought process of wanting to be okay and doing well, but the fear of what you might give up for doing that because of what this passage is talking about. So I know for myself that I've always kind of thought out, and then how you respond to people accordingly.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So, Angie, what you got?
One last thing. It was interesting that in chapter 6, it all seems to be focused on, Jesus is really, really, in some ways, focusing a lot on money. Because he talks about the poor, and giving to the poor. And then after that, he's talking about prayer. And in the prayer, give us our daily bread. And then after that, it's fasting, and kind of withholding that way. And then now, don't focus on the treasures, or you have the treasure, but you can't focus on both on wealth and, wealth and God, and he always seems to be coming back to that. Hey, where's your focus at, people? And if you go back to what you said at the beginning, the people that he's talking to are people that probably didn't have a lot of wealth. They would have been people that, probably that message, they're probably like, but we want wealth, but it's again, going back, where's your focus? Your focus shouldn't be on, trying to attain wealth, but more on your focus should be on God. So I thought that was neat too.
That's good. Yeah. And then even if Jesus is setting himself up as Messiah, Savior and King, maybe people's minds would immediately go to, that earthly kingdom. Okay, all right, sign us up. We're gonna rule. We're gonna get everything. And Jesus is kind of speaking to how things are really gonna be. Randy, what you got?
Are you going to tell them about the word mammon? Is that part of your studies?
Yeah, we'll get there maybe at the end. What would you like to share something now? You can share something now.
I didn't want to steal your thunder.
I don't know. I might have much thunder, so maybe you can bring the thunder for us.
That's my CB handle, and I'm good at being the thunder. Come on. So I was curious, what's this mammon? And Creflo Dollar recently delivered a dynamic sermon about having wealth and the fact that his congregation gave him a Rolls Royce because they really wanted him having this super nice car. And he got really convicted about having that fancy of a car, so he sells it, right? And then he realized he just denied his blessing from his congregation. No, that's not right either. He struggled with that. So he told about mammon. If you look that up, that's the seventh of, I think, 7 demons, and it's the spirit of greed. So basically what that scripture is saying is God gives and he's loving and free, and the other guy you can't serve is the spirit of mammon, which is greed.
Yeah, so kind of in my study when I was looking at stuff, and it's almost like the personification of greed, mammon. So more than just money, but a controlling, like kind of what you said was, you used the word spirit. But I think we can all maybe look at ourselves or places of culture and of the world where it just seems like there's a driving force to focus and to worship and to idolize having and gaining and getting and,
Mhm.
receiving. And then you get something and you want something better. And then, so I think it's that personification of gaining wealth for power and wealth's sake, for prestige, to build oneself up. So it's not just the money, but you said the spirit of greed, or that almost like it's a power, right? That works in your life. So which definitely I think adds some content. And I think Angie brought up the point where you don't have to have wealth to be controlled by the desire for it, right? Or and you can be, I would say, in want, and you can think that your hopes and your dreams lie just in having more, right? And then if you have everything that you want, oh, then your life is good. So of course that's the wrong spirit as well. So but
Question
yeah,
is,
what's that,
is
Randy?
it okay to have a lot of money and a lot of cars and a vacation Florida spot? As long as your heart's right, is it okay to have all that wealth?
Yeah, I think it's harder, right? Didn't Jesus say it was even harder, right?
Eye of the camel, right? Yeah, go ahead, eye of the needle, right?
Yeah. So and so I think, it maybe gets us off into a little bit of a tangent, but is still important. Jesus says, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get to heaven. And then I believe it's almost the verses that come right after that. Jesus says, well, without God, this is impossible, but with God, it is possible. And so, really, I don't know. What do you want to say? Is it possible to get to heaven without God if you're rich or you're poor, right? So it's like, and we talked about this before, where maybe those who are in need, it's a little bit easier, right? They see their need a little bit more. Whereas if you're not in need, you don't necessarily see the immediate need for God in your life. Yeah. So I think it just speaks to that, Randy, right? Where you say, okay, it's hard. Jesus said it was hard to get if you're rich. Now, I think it's impossible without God if you're poor still too, but maybe you're a little more open. But to kind of get to the beginning of the passage, Angie, kind of we're going in the same vein that I was going to go into with what you were talking about. The chapter setting it up about not being about earthly things and giving to the needy and fasting and doing these things. And what I was looking at is prior to Jesus speaking these verses in verse 19, he mentions rewards 7 times before verse 19. And so he mentions it in verse 1. You'll have no reward if you give just to be seen by others. And then he talks about, the hypocrites that are praying, they've received their reward, but then you'll be rewarded differently if you, that way. And then fasting, receiving your reward. So Jesus is setting up like this, rewards, you're you're getting something out of, the following Jesus and being a part of the kingdom of God. And then he says, it's not, he says, hey, we're not about storing up for ourselves treasures. So he uses a different word, but in my mind, as I, kind of am reading this time through, this is what's kind of standing out to me, playing coming into this passage where Jesus is comparing and contrasting these different rewards, and focusing in on what people should, the rewards that people should get. And so then he he gets into, the focus of not storing up for yourself treasures on heaven. And so I said this briefly on Sunday, and I went back and I talked to Carrie about it, and she didn't remember that I said it. So I think maybe I didn't do a good enough job. But in verse 19, where it says, where moths and vermin or rust destroy and thieves break in and steal, Jesus uses those two descriptors of destruction or destroy and then steal. He uses that another time, and I should have looked up if he used it anywhere else, but I know he uses it at least one other time, not in Matthew. Does anybody know where? I did mention it on Sunday.
Something about stealing your faith, isn't it?
What's that?
Was it stealing your faith? You don't let be on guard, do not let the devil steal your faith.
Not that verse, but maybe
okay.
similar.
Was it
Oh, what
John
you got?
10:10?
Oh, what's that, Angie?
Was it John 10:10?
John 10:10. Yeah, that stuck out to me the first time, where Jesus talks about the enemy. The enemy comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. So I thought that was, another thing that was like, oh, okay, that really, really stuck out to me, for sure. But what do you think? What do you think Jesus is getting at here? And maybe we kind of already, this goes without saying, but to store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. What is Jesus? What do you think he's referring to here in this passage? Storing up for yourself treasures in heaven. Do we know?
Just got an inkling, Pastor. It sounds like we're going to get some sort of reward for those things that are treasure in heaven, like the times we witnessed to others and they came to the Lord, and the times we volunteered on the project that it was really hard to get up and go do, and things like that. But we don't really know how great those treasures are going to be, do we? It's just a promise.
All right, DJ, respond.
I guess my question would be like, so if there's really no treasures on earth other than being able to spend time with God, then what would treasures in heaven be other than just spending time with God? Like maybe more one-on-one time, personal tea time with God kind of thing.
Like the Disney lunch with characters.
Or golf.
Yeah, mini golf. Yeah, dodgeball.
Golf tea time or liquid tea time.
So DJ, your interpretation, or what you're kind of stating, is the treasures on earth, or treasures in heaven, is being in the presence of God, and so we're always going to have that in heaven. So that's the treasure.
I mean, that's what I was more thinking. Just because if there's no other treasure on earth except for being in God's presence through the Holy Spirit, then in heaven, I mean, it says we'll be in God's presence, but a greater treasure could be just being closer to God's presence. Just seems like there's a lot of imagery of being in the outskirts of God's presence and not being as close to God in heaven. And so I think the greatest reward would be to be closer to God.
Okay. I like that. Joel, what you got?
So I have a question, particularly what you and DJ were talking about, in terms of the only the treasure being in terms of God. So does that mean like if we're doing the different things, doing God's work, sharing his word, helping, which he doesn't need our help. So may I answer a question. But fulfilling our part or path that he figured that we should be in terms of maybe helping bring someone closer to him by our conversations or lack of those opportunities to share or to be an example of his for what you and DJ are talking about. Is that not I guess a treasure? Or is that the reward we're talking about of avoiding, or
I mean,
that doing it for the right reason? Or
I mean, my opinion is more of, if we're in God's presence on earth and we are in God's kingdom on earth, then we'll be in God's kingdom in heaven. So it's not, I guess I don't like to think of it as different works give you rewards, because then it's easy to fall into that trap, at least for me, to, oh, if I do this, I will get this. Even if it's in heaven, it's still an earthly concept. And so, like, mentally, I can't conceive any, heavenly materialistic items. I don't know, maybe there will be, but for me, it's just easier to conceive what I conceive now. And I can conceive, being in God's presence on earth. And so it's easier to, oh, well, that makes sense. It would be like that in heaven. So I don't like to compare it to like works get you this. But I mean, it could play out like that. I think, if, God leads you to do certain things, then you're following and, you're in constant fellowship with God, then he, obviously he probably would lead you to do certain things. But I think it could be, it just could look so differently for different people that I don't like to quantify it. Well, if I, tell 1,000 people about Jesus, then I get more rewards or something. Even though, we went over the other parables about, different, how many minas different people get, and then how did you use. And so, there's plenty of verses, I think, to still back that kind of concept up. But for me personally, I would fall into the trap of, if I do this, I get this. But
okay.
Which
Almost
is
like
why
Thank you.
maybe he doesn't delineate the reward, because people would do that, wouldn't they? If they knew what the rewards were and how great they were, that's exactly what we would become.
that's a
The
good
word
point.
is plural, treasures. So I think God's got something for us. He isn't telling us what it is. I have an idea. It's pretty, and of course, the first thing we have to wrap our heads around is the fact that, well, no, wait a minute. How could I put that? I'll come back to that. I had a senior moment.
So I heard something this week in my, as I study for a message, I will, I'll get into commentaries and I'll read, kind of do a backdrop of, all right, here's kind of the things that I'm looking at and the different areas that I want to go into. And then usually I'll listen to a couple different teachings on the same subject, just to see like where people kind of go with it. And let me see, I lost my train of thought. Oh, okay, gotcha.
It's catching.
It was no. I thought I've never heard this before, and I might reference it on Sunday, so you guys get the sneak peek or whatever. But the teacher, he was saying, when can you experience God? Like when can you experience God? Can you experience God yesterday? Like can you experience God tomorrow? Well, maybe, right? But there's only one thing's for certain, is you can experience God's presence now, today. And so, and I know like there's different ways of saying that or whatever, but the point that he was making is, it's almost like, control what you can control today, and don't worry about, yesterday, or don't worry about, tomorrow. And that's what Jesus ends up getting into, in our next passage of scripture is, hey, why are you worrying? But it's the point of focusing on God's presence in your life today and now. And I think that kind of goes along with both of what DJ is saying, and also what Randy is saying, is that like if we're focusing on the Lord, and we are trying to live by the strength of his Holy Spirit now, then that's going to produce fruit for tomorrow. But we can't control that fruit, and we might not even know what the treasures are. There's these promises that are kind of put out there in an indescript way, but it's that I can experience God's presence, I can live in his grace now, and what might that produce in the future is good. But yeah, where's that focus today and now? So I like that. That has stuck with me kind of throughout the week, and been something that I've been thinking about, just phrased in a little bit of a different way. But yeah. Any other thoughts on the treasures in heaven, Randy?
I remembered, but I just forgot. One of the pastors that I used to study with said, it comes down to this: everything that we did for Christ on this earth, every service, every work for his church and his kingdom, are heavenly, eternal things that last. And everything that man and his ego, all the things we attempt to do and accomplish, suddenly become, in perspective, nothing in the long term. I'm thinking of the egos of the people that built the Titanic and how fast it was going to go, and they missed that tiny rudder, and it was a disaster. There was a guy that tried to go rescue a bomber up in Greenland, and he had it running only to have a little APU come off the mounts and started firing it back, and the whole thing burned up before they could fly it home. Think of all the businessmen who thought they were, in their own egos, I'm going to build the greatest company ever, and only to go bankrupt. As an old guy, remember I'm 65, some of you guys are way behind me, I kind of see that perspective now. The things that I attempted to build in my life, my dynasty was my computer science program that I hand wrote for my students, and it doesn't exist today. So all our efforts to do earthly things come to that at some point or another. And the things I've done to further God's kingdom are the only things that really remain. Paul said it best: I used to practice all this religiosity stuff, and now I count it all as a loss. Remember? He was right.
Yeah. So it's interesting, if you do kind of get into the word that Jesus uses there, it's really it's talking about a receptacle for valuables, which I think is pretty interesting. That's store up for yourself treasures. And so that maybe we are the the receptacle of treasures. So another way to think about it. But I don't know if we really need to spend much time on the different areas where people put their treasures on earth. I think we kind of all know what those are. Maybe the better question is why, right? We all kind of have maybe different areas that we store up treasures, but why? And I think this is what Jesus is really trying to get to. So what do we think? What's the deeper issue that Jesus is getting to here? Why do we do this? Why do humans want to store up treasures on earth, build huge houses, and all those things. Joel?
When you said that, my first thought is we're focused on on our appearance to others. You know, we're not focusing on what God thinks. We're definitely focusing on what others think, or what we think they think, or what they see, and the importance of that being. We're thinking in terms of things in terms of this world. We're not thinking in terms of God's teaching, but what the world says, or worldly. What's the word I'm trying to think?
Materialistic.
Yeah, what's that? What was that, Randy? What's that word?
Materialistic.
Materialistic. Something like what DJ was saying before, which is what our focus is on. You know, is our focus on the people around us, or how the people perceive us, or is our focus on what God is? You know, trying to outdo our neighbor. You know, not sure if I said that right, but along those lines.
Yeah. No, I think you said a lot of things in there. You know, talking about controlling your image, right? Controlling how your perception of in other people's eyes, and how other people view you, and yeah, I think that's one major driving force. Anything else, DJ?
And this, basically, just kind of another way of saying it, but I was just going to say insecurity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's it's interesting. If you it's almost it is backwards, but you think people that have the most they have power, right? Money and influence, and all of these things, but does it really take power, or like willpower to just be able to, all right, I got this, and I'm gonna spend it, and I'm gonna, I would say really it probably takes more power to control it, right? And to say, okay, I have the ability to have a huge house, or I have the ability to do all these things, but I'm going to control it and use it in a different direction, and so that people don't look at me, but they look towards Christ. That's real power, right? Or that's kingdom power, if it's directed in a way that serves God. And real security is in who you are, is not building your life around things, earthly things. So that's kind of what my mind has been, probably not in an eloquent way that I put it, but it's just like kingdom power, or kingdom security, as opposed to that world power and security. But yeah, I don't know, that's just kind of what, I don't know if that makes sense at all. That's kind of what I'm thinking a little bit. Any other reasons?
Well, one thing that I was kind of thinking about was, we kind of always go back to everything, everything's a heart issue, but this time I almost kind of wonder if it's more of a mindset. And so maybe the treasure, the reward is that, so kind of what you were saying, Pastor Jan, is like, so when you have all this, you have this power and this influence, there's a lot of energy that you have to put forth to maintain and keep that kind of stuff up. But I think what Jesus is trying to get at is maybe that, more like there's this rest and there's this freedom when your mind shifts, changes to that of more of, God's mindset. And the more that you transform, and the more that you are more in one with God, and, thinking that somebody, like all that other stuff just kind of fades away, and you're not just constantly wrestling and striving and doing all this stuff, and you're not focusing on yourself, and you're not focusing on what I have to do to, what should I be doing for someone. I mean, everything just becomes a much easier thing because you're just being with God, and then everything just flows a lot simpler. And so I just kind of think he's kind of trying to bring this whole like mindset that's not part of this world, and trying to kind of bring that down to people, and like that would be what your treasure is this easiness and this ability to just be, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. It's always hard for me on these Thursdays to not get ahead of myself, because I'm already thinking about this coming week, and where Jesus does talk about worry. And if I were Randy, I know you like Stephen Furtick. If I were a more like really fiery preacher, or like a TD Jakes, right, where he can just kind of get up and just kind of say a whole bunch of stuff, but just that I would really drill into the idea of like your worry, it's tied to your worship and your worry. They kind of go hand in hand, and that's what Jesus talks about kind of right after this, and it's important to look at the whole scope of things, but then he immediately goes into, hey, what are you worried about? Look at the birds, look at the lilies, and so I believe kind of what Jesus is setting up is he's almost saying is that worry follows, our focus is being in the wrong place. And we have an unnecessary fixation on these certain things, and then they produce anxieties or insecurities and unneeded fears inside of us, that if we just had our focus in the right place, we'd be able to live as we were created to, like the birds do, like the flowers, do. So, Angie?
Exactly right. And what Rachel was saying is exactly right. Because to me, when you were saying, okay, well, why do you store up? I was like, okay, you store up for pleasure or for power or for sustenance, or, that would be the main reason why people, especially the people he was talking to, probably would have thought that that's the reason why you would store things away here on this earth. But and when you talked about the power, they accumulate all that stuff and they feel like they have power. But really, just like Rachel's saying, to truly have power would be to release all that and then to rely solely on God. And then when you do that, you've got all the power, because basically you don't have to have those things for sustenance. The person that is not storing anything away is basically just counting on the fact that God's going to supply and God's going to provide for them. And that's a whole different kind of power, because then you're talking about, instead of the your own power to obtain, you're talking about the power of faith. So I mean, that's the whole focus of it. That's why I like what Rachel said.
Yeah. And then immediately what Jesus says in the next chapter is, he said, hey, you have a little faith, right? He immediately ties it to where your faith is at. So yeah, it all kind of flows together. So then Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so it is interesting. Jesus talks about the moth and the vermin, or the moth and the rust, breaking in and stealing your treasures and destroying your treasures that are on earth. But he does make that correlation between your heart and your treasure as well. And so, if you can make the same correlation, do these earthly treasures, do they steal and destroy and eat away at, our hearts, are the innermost parts of our emotions and our spirits, what we believe and feel. And so it's like, oh, that's another way to look at kind of building your life around earthly treasures, is those things that they really do destroy and steal who God has created us to be. So I don't really know if I said that on Sunday or not, but that also kind of stood out to me as well. So then I think the question kind of goes, and Jesus does answer it, but how do you treasure the right things, right? How do you treasure the right things? And then what Jesus immediately goes into is he talks about your eyes, which is nice. And so he talks about your eye. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. The light within you is darkness. How great is that darkness? All right. What is Jesus saying here? Anybody want to take a stab at it? What is he talking about? Joel, the most courageous of us all.
Well, actually, I've been thinking, and when I asked the question earlier, and I was thinking how Rachel talked about it, and then how DJ explained, and I'm going to think of a movie that I looked at recently, and in the movie that I was looking at, they painted this character as being someone, well, I'll just say not responsible. What DJ said about people worried about insecure, but this individual, when you began to sort of just see what the character was doing, his response for many things is he was doing so many wonderful things, and his response was, you just do what is right. That's what we're supposed to do. Doing what is right. This person was in a position that they could volunteer, and no one really knew who this person was. This person was helping to see things were getting to the poor and orphanage, but never placed his name on it. I think thinking about it now is, when you talk about seeing the light, what Jesus is, like DJ said, it's not about your rewards here. It's doing what's right, doing what God created us, where we were created in his image. So if we're created in his image, people ask the question, what would Jesus do? But being created in his image means following our heart and doing the things that God would do, helping someone. You see someone in need, do you go to that person? Randy, the person a couple times come by the church, and Randy immediately look at letting his, following his heart the way God would see things in terms of helping that individual, seeing that need and wanting to help just because, not just right, but his heart was there. I mean, that's the way God created us to be. I think he created us to see the light, to see the beauty around us. I think that's what he means about the light. Listening to the girls talk about the books they were reading, and they're talking about the flowers and the creation, and I think we missed that. We missed just sitting back and just seeing it all. Seeing the beauty in everything. And then the willingness to share it, and maybe helping others see it, just because it's right. It's what he does. We were created to be like him. Yeah, man, that's too much. I mean, I know.
Hold on, brother.
No, you said a lot of good things in there. So what is what does Jesus mean in sorry, let me get it here. Verse 23. If your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? What does Jesus mean there? How can light be darkness? DJ?
I guess I was just going to add more of the comment, like the imagery that's kind of used. It's like if you just have a little bit of sin, you're full of sin. Or if you just have, a little, if you just have Jesus, so just like a little bit of light, you're full of light. Kind of like I guess I just recall, like in First John, like the whole, like when he, what the whole comparison of just having, if you just have a little bit of sin, then you're full of evil. But if you just have a little bit of righteousness, then you can be full of righteousness. Like there's all these like extremes of, you're full of darkness, but if you have Jesus or have the Holy Spirit in you, then you can be full of light. And so it's basically, I mean, I don't know, I guess I kind of take it as, it's kind of like when you take a candle into a room of darkness, it doesn't take much light to fill the room. But I mean, with that comparison with Jesus, in us.
Okay. Randy?
Nice.
I got the same take on that. And I kind of go back thinking, well, Middle East, nighttime, lamp in your hand. If you're going to go somewhere, you're not going to see very far. You hold your lamp out and that illuminates your path, doesn't it? So Yeshua is telling us that if our eyes aren't seeing properly, we may not go the proper path. And then he challenges us to look inside where his holy light is living in this darkness and illuminates the possibilities of the wonders of life the way God would love us to experience it. And that question comes back then, if you don't have that light in your soul, then how dark is it in there? How much are you satisfied to sit there in the dark? It's the heart thing again. He's telling us our heart and our eyes are our steering mechanism in life. And I think he calls us to know him and to use good judgment in what we see so that we can have maximum joy and fulfillment in this life that we're living.
That's good. That's good. Anybody else? So I don't know if this one was, how can the light within you be darkness?
The absence of light is darkness.
All right. There you go.
Maybe that's what he's trying to point out.
Mhm.
Is the question of how can the light in you be darkness? If he says that the eye is the lamp of your body, and a lamp illuminates, and it shows who you are. It shows essentially who you are. So if your eyes are good, then you're showing that good. But if you're bad, then even the light, what's supposed to be showing you, is still going to be nothing but darkness, because that's who you are. That's what I came away with. I don't know. That's hard.
One little thing I thought of was, like, your eyesight is kind of one of the senses that kind of, so like Randy was saying, if you have a light to illuminate your path, you're going to see it probably before your feet are going to get there, or before you touch something, you're going to see it first. So, I mean, the only other thing I can think of would be like maybe hearing, if you hear something else. But like a lot of times, the first thing that you're going to focus on is with your eyesight, and then everything else kind of follows that.
Yeah, it really is amazing. You know, your your eyes are really amazing. But like, I mean, you think about the level of illustration that you can use with your sight, and you look out, and you can see everything, right? And you can, as you're looking out onto the world, you're also taking in the world, right? You know, it's like, so you're looking out and you're viewing everything, but then your mind is also deciphering everything and taking it in. And so it really does, you know, Jesus, the incredible teacher, but you know, even going back, and how do you look out onto the world? What do you look out into the world and you see, and how do you view the world? And so, you know, to use Proverbs 21 verse 4, I think really gets to the heart of what Jesus is saying. And I don't know if he was, you know, thinking about this proverb as he was teaching here, but Proverbs 21 verse 4 says, you know, haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked are sin. And so it's, you know, it's almost like what Jesus is saying, you know, as he's, you know, saying, and like the lamp is what you, it's like where it directs you, right? So your eyes, it directs you in your life, but then as you're directing your lamp in certain places, it's also going to either shine a light into you or shine darkness in, you know, shine sin into you. And you know, maybe another way of putting it, but it's like Jesus is saying that your light, that, you know, you're looking at, you're focusing, and if you're focusing on earthly treasures, it's going to produce a, you know, almost like a darkness. It's a light producing darkness in you, which is kind of like, you know, a crazy way to put it, but it's like maybe another way to think about it is it's a lamp or a flashlight that will only lead you in destructive paths, right? Where, as in other parts of scripture, you know, he talks about your word is a lamp to my feet and a light, you know, to my path. Whereas Jesus is almost saying when we focus on earthly treasures, it's going to lead us down destructive paths and into, you know, to dark places that are going to steal and kill and destroy, you know, the life and the light that Jesus has, you know, meant us to live. So it's, I mean, it really is, there's some depth there as you get into it. DJ, what you got?
So like in the parables, we kind of pose this question occasionally, like if he was talking to believers or unbelievers. I guess I was thinking of it as more if he was posing it to unbelievers with the potential of becoming believers. And so that light, I was, in my mind, was more correlating it to just our spirit. And if we, you know, if that would be, you know, a good light or, you know, a godly light. But if we don't, or simply practice evil, then our spirit would then, you know, show darkness. Kind of, I guess, kind of like what you were saying. But I guess I was thinking of light as in more of our spirit, not a physical light, I guess. And then just back to your question of how light could be, you know, show darkness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I would say, I think Jesus here, maybe even just as speaking to like human nature, right? Just humanity. And you know, when you what what humans need to live in the kingdom of God, right? He's almost pointing it out. So it's to not focus on, not have your light shine on earthly treasures, but on heavenly ones. I don't know. That's kind of the way that I interpret it to a degree. Any other thoughts on the light and the darkness? The light within you is darkness. It's one of the things I came across was 2 Corinthians 11, 14. 2 Corinthians 11, 14 says, and no wonder Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It's not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness, their end will be what their actions deserve. A little bit of a tie-in there of certainly not light, but appearing, appearing as an angel of light. And so isn't it the same thing about things of this world, right? That you chase after. If you chase after wealth, or you chase after these things that you think are going to make your life, and it's really an angel of light that is just masquerading as that, right? And to a certain degree. So a little bit of a tie in there. I thought it was at least worth mentioning. And so then it's really kind of interesting the way that Jesus goes from illustration to illustration, and then he says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Whereas Randy already said that, that word that's translated money is mammon. And so Jesus moves from the illustration about lamps in your eyes and light in the darkness, and he moves right into the illustration of serving a master, which I think is pretty interesting that he uses that illustration and not being able to serve two masters. Not either you serve money or mammon, or you serve God. So what do we think about? What do you think about that? Why do you think Jesus does that? What do you think Jesus is referring to as serving mammon, serving money, as opposed to serving God? Mainly, what are just our thoughts on that final little verse there that Jesus moves into? Joel?
For myself, I think of it when he's talking about that particular verse, which I mentioned always kind of in terms of scare me, is reminding somewhat what Randy said, DJ had mentioned before. All of you have kind of touched on it, which is what you're seeking out. We talked about the treasures. The mammon for money gives a direct correlation of, even back then, people pursuing money, looking good before God, but in essence, they were looking good so they could get their money, so they could get their wealth, to feed their personal need. They weren't getting money to help others. I think that's the sense of it. They weren't using maybe talents that God gave them to help build up for maybe orphans or for the widows, but they were seeking the money for their power, seeking the money for their self-importance, versus focusing on God, focusing on doing his work. And I'm going to remind myself of what Jesus is. It's not so much of doing work to get into heaven, but our purpose of bringing others closer to God. You know, what's more important? You know, going and get my money, or working towards maybe helping others see God, reach him, you know.
Yeah, and you know, it really is interesting that Jesus uses, you know, that word master. You know, really talking to something that has absolute and complete, you know, ownership of you. And really that is, I think, even a good descriptor of what, you know, materialism, you know, greed can have over people. Absolute ownership, right? You can take absolute ownership over people. And so, you know, Jesus is saying in his, you know, in his kingdom, there's to be one Lord, you know, there's one master. And that's where our, you know, complete devotion should go to. And so I guess maybe the real question is, how do we do that, right? How do we, in this day and age where, you know, materialism is really easy, maybe it's easier now than it ever has been. How do we fight against that? What do we do on a daily basis, a monthly basis, or a yearly basis to not have that love of money? What do we do? Randy, you're laughing over there.
I'm thinking about this coming Monday night. I've got the question all set for you guys. We'll let the girls in on this one. We usually keep this a secret, girls. We just like talking among ourselves. But I'm thinking of a guy named Green that owns a very large chain of stores called Hobby Lobby. And I'm thinking of my personal buddy, Jerry, that owns 6 Mr. Mufflers. And I'm thinking about all the people they employ. And I think that I could name you a whole lot of other businessmen that have been successful. And I think most of them have one thing in common. They found that verse, seek first the kingdom of God, and then all these things will be added unto you. And as they did so, they had a certain balance in their life. It's not against God's will to be wealthy, but the scriptures tell us to whom much is given, much is required. So here's your question for Burger Night. What characteristics and elements of those characters, those souls, made it okay to be successful financially? And what can they do with it? How do they decide how to do the next step? Is it really about building a bigger company or helping more people find their way through life by working with them? Something to think about. That's why I was laughing. God is good.
So Randy, you're kind of touching on the subject of there's certainly people that, you know, that love the Lord, and yet they have. And so I think what you said there is seeking first the kingdom of God, right? So seeking first. Yeah, so I guess maybe that's my question. How do we do that? what do we put up in our lives that have helped us to maybe fight against the urge for materialism and the temptation to put our our hope or our faith and trust in earthly things. What are some things that you do maybe that you help you seek first God's kingdom, or that help you keep your eyes in the right area? What do we think? What are some things that you try to do to get you to focus? Anybody.
What's funny, I picked this background for tonight, a testimony to where I spent some time. And my prayer is, Lord, let me just hold that loosely. One little fire and that'd all be gone. All those things are sitting there getting covered by dust. The glue is drying up. It'll all fall apart eventually. And I know this. I just did that because I like art. And where some people might see, oh man, Randy put a fortune in model cars, maybe so. Not all at once. And when I see that stuff, I just realize those were the times I didn't go out to the bars, didn't chase wild women, didn't get involved in things that got me into trouble. And I once put my hand out and thanked Gene Winfield, who designed the first custom model cars in the early 60s, and said thanks. Because I had a nice little hobby at home, I stayed out of trouble. Thanks for your part in it. And he just grinned. He gave me the big grip, I think that's where I am on that obsession that I work with. I've never had a big company. I've never really chased anything with that type of greed. I enjoy getting something better. My parents they were that way. They came through the hard times in 1929 and 1933 in the Big Depression, and they liked the idea of getting somewhere in life, and they worked hard. Both worked in a time you didn't have to. And they got kind of comfortable. And they always taught me that, you get your college education, you work hard, and you can have some nice things. I never had that sermon on the spirit of mammon, but they did warn me about being too greedy about things and too impersonal and just showing my butt or however you want to put it. To always be humble. So I can be humble. I'm not good at what I did back there. They just kind of populated my basement because I never threw anything out. Ask my wife, she'll tell you, I never throw anything out. So stuff kind of piles up. That's all there is to that. That's the end of the story. But that's my question for you guys come Monday night. What is it about those corporate guys that have made big money and they're godly people? That's the question to answer. What did they figure out? What have they got going on? What's in that character? I don't know. Something to think about.
Angie, what you got?
I remember about Abraham and how he believed and had faith, and it was accounted to him as righteousness. And so when I'm going about my work, I try to think, okay, well, how can I be a righteous person? It's especially when you're held to for instance, I work for a corporation. That corporation is all about money, and they want me to see people. They want me to see as many people as I can, funnel them through there like they're, cattle, as fast as I can and for as much as I can, and I have to remind myself that, the Lord takes care of you financially. And the reason he takes care of you financially is because you don't do that. You're seeing people with integrity and making sure that you're doing what people actually need and trying to help them to get to be able to afford their medicines, to be able to help them where there are people that don't have insurance and see them for free, and just trying to make sure that I handle myself in a godly manner, and constantly always trying to remind myself of that, because, I too, when you're a type A personality, you want to be successful, but what's the definition of success? And trying to remember that the definition of success that I used to have when I was younger before the Lord, is not the definition of success that I have now. And it's more about, well, how do I go about my life in a godly fashion? And when I see that I am no longer behaving in a godly fashion, how do I recorrect or redirect?
That's good.
God bless you.
And it really gets into who God's created you to be, right?
Right.
And I think maybe to not answer your question completely, but I think some people, for whatever reason, they just know how to make money, right? And it's just like, that's who they are. And their minds, the way they think about things, that's very, business driven, those types of things. That's just who they are. And maybe in some sense, that's who God has created them to be. But it's like, if you spend enough time with anybody, that person's not wired just like you are. And so that the way that they worship, and then the way that they have to live out their walk with the Lord, with integrity. I think, Angie, you used that word, but honestly, before God, I think that's kind of what it really does come down to is, Lord, where do you want me to direct my attention? How do you want me to best glorify you? And then, I think God takes care of the details, and, I'm not going to have to answer to, to live my life like the owner of Hobby Lobby, right? And all that he's been blessed with. And he's not going to have to answer to live, like me. So I think that's what's, important to remember. We're all really measured against Jesus, right? And none of us measure up. And so that's kind of what it comes down to, and kind of the way that I think about it, for sure. But it's that, that personal relationship, right? The cliche, but really that's what it is. It's that personal relationship that you have with God, and that, is that every day, when can you experience God's presence? Right now. When can you go to the Lord? Right now. When can he deal with your heart? Right now. When can he direct you? Right now. And when does he want to do that? He wants to continue to do that for the rest of your life. And so that's where it's that, walking it out, and him dealing with you and directing you and leading you and guiding you in the ways of goodness and righteousness, right? So I really do like this, like these 5 verses, of course, that Jesus is teaching. It's like Jesus is the only master that we can really trust to lead us into into truth and to rest, and that's where he eventually takes it, into a life that is, where we're not worrying about the clothes we wear and the food we eat. So it gets even better. Any other final thoughts? Kind of wrap up. Anything we need to pray about? We'll keep Donnie in prayer, and Deborah.
Yeah, seeing your dad and your mom, any chance they're going to come back and be with us?
I don't know. They're so busy. My dad's actually on his way to Missouri right now.
Missouri, wow.
Hunting the deer.
Retirement is good.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
told him we're going to put him on the prayer list if he doesn't start showing back up here.
Yeah, I will. I'll tell him that. Joel, what you got?
Just from my niece Larissa, that she'll continue to heal while she's at home from the COVID, and just as she works through the pain, that she seemed to continue to heal and get better. Sorry.
Bless you.
Sorry.
Stop there.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Just for her, and then for our future daughter-in-law, her family. Her grandmother passed beginning of the week, and just praying for her and her family. And I believe that's her second grandparent this year for her. So
Yeah, her husband.
just imagine that's hard for her. Was it her husband, Ange?
Yeah, Norma's husband died in 2018, and then now Norma passed.
Mm.
Yeah, seemed like a sweet woman.
Oh,
Looking forward to meeting her.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
for those two right now.
Yeah. If you guys could pray for Carrie's brother Matt. He came down with a fever, and COVID's kind of been going around his whole friend group. And so yeah, we'll just leave it at that. But he's back living with Carrie's parents. He just sold his house and is in between buying. So kind of the whole little family there, because they're all close, living, by each other, near each other, and so yeah, just pray for their health. I don't know if he got tested or anything. Just heard yesterday he had a fever. So his name is Matt. Angie?
I won't say in detail because I know we're recording, but I would ask that you pray for still my coworker. She came to work and told me some things that were going on in her life